He said, can you meet us at Philadelphia International Airport? And I said, yes. And he said, what would it take for us to get you? And I said, well, we have a list. He said, show me the list. He said, if we look at the list and we say yes, will you sign an LOI today? I think by the third time he looked up, he goes, we're going to do this.
Welcome back to The Turn. I'm Corey Mitchell of Iconic Founders. Today's episode is with Phil Cooper. He has a pest control business that does bed bugs. He took the business from $500K to $11 million and sold it for life-changing money. He was the sales guy and CEO. His brother, an entomologist, the scientist. But together, they had a superpower. Welcome back to The Turn. I'm Corey Mitchell of Iconic Founders. The Turn is where blue-collar founders talk about the businesses they've built, the value they've created, and what comes next after they sell. Phil Cooper, welcome to The Turn.
Thanks, Corey.
Tell our audience a little bit more about your family business and how you got started.
Well, pest control, second generation. Started going down to the office when I was 5 years old, working on magnet boards, learning how to see what not done list was by moving magnets around on the board. That was my Sunday morning for like years. I went off to school, got my degree in marketing and finance, come into the business in 84. And we're tiny, and by when we finished up in 18, we had gone from where we had like 5 employees when I started, and my brother and I grew it to the largest privately held pest control company in Jersey, 110 people, not looking to sell, and my dad always taught us to build those systems, build the people, and you'll be a wanted commodity, but you don't have to. And we were thinking going third generation, didn't, got an offer from Terminix. We had a number and things we wanted. They went beyond that, and yikes, it was a sale that was unexpected and generational wealth for the family. So awesome. That's
incredible, especially for an $11 million business to have generational wealth is crazy. I want to hear more about that, but I want to go back a step. There's something your dad had that made him, it's very courageous to go start a business. And so what was it about him? What was he like where he went out on his own and he started this small business that became this business that created generational wealth for you and your brother?
Corey just worked his ass off. I mean, he just was selfless. He did this for us and the family. I mean, my mom would take us to the ball games and my mom would do all the things with us. And he was working his rear end off, and he'd come home and he was exhausted, but we'd talk shop every night. There was no separation of family and business in our world. And I had friends who, they had no idea what their dads did. Heck, I was part of the business.
Isn't that funny? I relate to this so much because it becomes the dinner table conversation. I remember walking into restaurants with my dad, and we're counting customers and we're trying to figure out the average ticket size. We're going, how the hell does this business make any money? I'm sure you had those same exact conversations where it just becomes part of the rhythm. And 99.9% of families don't do that. That is not normal.
It was our glue. And my mom was there too doing it. There was many times I said my mom was a smarter business person than my dad. She would just, because she was with the outside board of directors looking in, and she would just give her insights saying, like, I really don't know what I'm talking about. But, well, yes, she did know what she was talking about. Like, brilliant.
Tell us about where the business was at when you joined it as an adult.
So it's 84. We had these things called burrow machines. He had these disc things that we still have some. It was in the advent of, computers. Hey guys, if you're watching this, you have no idea what we're talking about here. You gotta be like a dinosaur like me. Yeah, it's like crazy. But he was really in the forefront of trying to bring in technology. But yeah, we had, like five people in the company. There's like 3 technicians, and my dad has these dreams and he sees, it's his son, and I'm a commission-only salesperson. And he says, I want you to grow commercial business. I want you to go into virgin territory, like expand this business, see what you can do, go at it. And so that's what I did for my first 4 years and crushed it. It was great. I mean, I can still remember the buildings I knocked on, and it was cold call sales and developed markets. And we became, we went from, doing small mom and pop to owning the office building market in New Jersey. We did. We owned the Building Owners and Managers Association. We were Vendor of the Year many times. We just grew it. And then the next thing, Corey, was to get my brother in. My brother wanted nothing to do with pest control. He hated pesticides. He hated what we did. My dad used to send him on the worst jobs, which completely wrecked him. We sent him off to get his master. He came out of the University of Delaware, comes out with a degree in entomology. He wants to be a scientist. He wants to be a professor, yada, yada. My job, transform the company so that it's something that he wants to come into and that we can go get his degree and, take us to another level. And that's exactly what we did. My brother is now, he has his doctorate in entomology. He's one of the top 3 bedbug experts in the world. It's one of the things that attracted Terminix to us. They wanted us to change their bedbug program. My job, make money off of my brother's brilliance. And that was my job.
It sounds like you really admire your brother. Tell us a little bit more about the relationship with your brother.
The great news is my brother and I mean, we're super tight. We're thick as thieves, but we're totally different. I mean, our core values are the same. So that's, you always go back. I mean, the values have got to be the same. And we do. We have the base core foundations that are the same. And that's where it ends. He's, I'm a AAA. I love a lot of material things. I'm just that guy. And in the world of, like an EOS world, I'm a flaming visionary. And Rick, on the other hand, he's a deadhead. He traveled with the Grateful Dead. I would never travel with the Grateful Dead. He's, up and down, he can do it really, he's really laid back. He's really, doesn't need a lot of stuff, wants to change the world, a lot of kumbaya. It's like, oh my God. And he's a scientist and he never wanted to run the company. When we were selling to Terminix, I mean, he wanted the cash up front. I was willing to take a chance, and, if a PE had come in and had given us, more of an upside, I would have taken that if it was right. He didn't need that. He wanted the guarantee. So yeah, he's, still amazing. And, we did wonderful things together.
Transitions from family member to family member are always hard. How did you ink a deal with your dad to take ownership of the company?
Well, first was, I'll give you my graduation gift to my parents. So it's the George Washington University. It's graduation day in May, and I hand them a U.S. News and World Report, and it says like the top fastest, impactful CEOs, and I cut out the picture in the middle and I stick my picture on there and I change the date from 10 years from there. And I put, I think, Pepsi down there. Because I always saw, and I had said to my dad, look, it's one of two things. Either I come back to the family business, but as much as I love you, we're exactly alike. We're going to kill each other. And if, I work for you past my 30th birthday, I'll probably kill myself. So you've got to, if I can cut my teeth and prove myself, the company's got to be mine by age 30. Like, how dare I?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Like,
you got a lot of balls.
Really? Yeah. but what 22-year-old with, like we do? I mean, and otherwise that I'm going to head off and I'm going to go get a job in corporate and I'm going to be that guy on that U.S. News and World Report. He said, I want you. If you do what you say you're going to do, it's yours. And I'm going it's 98. I'm approaching my 30th birthday and I'm learning, but there were things that he wasn't teaching me at that point. Like I didn't know how to go buy insurance. Crazy, but he didn't teach me that. And I knew that if I didn't know how to do that, there was no way I could run and own the business. And I sat down with him and I said, look, this is not going according to plan. Am I cutting my teeth? He said, yes. I said, then we got to finish this off. Otherwise, I'm out of here. And my brother was supporting me. And I remember, gosh, it was like my 29th, just 6 months after my 29th birthday, like a year, and I'm not 30 yet. And he called my brother and I in and he said, I've got news for you guys. We're transferring stock today. This is your company now. I didn't even get to my 30th birthday.
There was no negotiation on purchase price. It's just a gift of the stock.
He gifted the stock because he had built his own wealth and was conservative enough to secure his future. And I don't know very many business owners that gift their company to to their second generation. It doesn't happen, but he did.
That's amazing. So he had a $500,000 revenue business at the time, and he was able to save enough money to feel really comfortable in his retirement.
And I think by then we were probably, it's funny, you don't remember, but we're probably closer to $1 million at that point because we had grown it from 84 to 91. Yeah. Slowly, steadily, maybe we were at 800,000. I have no idea. That's a lot of money. And he just kept plowing, and we lived really simply. I mean, we didn't do a ton of things. We didn't go on extravagant vacations, and he just plowed money away, just plowed it away, just kept putting it away.
And now a little bit about our sponsor. I live in Colorado. It's super dry here. And for years, I put an electrolyte in my water. It just makes me want to drink it more. I tell all the businesses I work with, keep your guys hydrated. We talk about hydration as one of the number one points of safety. I've been using Salt of the Earth. This stuff's great. It's got great flavor. You can just throw them in your bag, and wherever you go, just throw it in the water bottle. It'll keep you hydrated, and they taste great. The grapefruit's my favorite flavor. They also have this 4-pack that's pretty sweet. You can try them all. And now they've introduced the creatine, which is also awesome because it's one of these things everyone's talking about now. You got to get your creatine in every day. So try Salt of the Earth. For all the listeners of The Turn, you can get a 15% discount. Just use code ICONIC or click the link in the show notes. One of the things I see all the time when I'm working with companies is that they literally have all of their money tied up in the business. They might have been making millions of dollars a year for years and years, but they haven't carved any out for themselves. And they literally have no way to retire unless they sell. Phil's father, he did it differently. And even though it was a small company, he was in a great position to retire. And that set up Phil and his brother for success. I tell my clients all the time, your business is overwhelmingly your largest asset, okay? And no wealth manager, no money manager is gonna have you that concentrated in one thing. So I'm always advising, pull out some of your profits and diversify away from your asset, because you just never know when things are going to change in your company or the economy, and you want to have some diversification outside of your business. So you're the sales guy. Tell us about that job. That had to be so hard.
It was hard, but it was also learning the things that work so that I could eventually build a sales force. I mean, we didn't get to 11 million on me. We got to it, with Allison and Mike and Dennis and, my sales team. But it was understanding the activities. And, I think everything that we talk about later on, the systems that we built, the use of EOS, the use of what now has become accelerated gross profit for our frontline managers. It's all systems, Corey. And I learned the system of selling. And it was, what were the activities that I had to do every day? How many doors did I need to knock on? How many people did I need to call? I understood that funnel inside out.
Most people don't ever get beyond being the core salesperson in their organization, which is why most businesses don't grow, or at least they don't grow very fast.
Yeah, well, let's do 10 years of screwing it all up, trying to get a sales manager and salespeople. Yeah, I made how many years did I cost myself? Way too many.
So help our listeners skip that 10 years. What are a couple of things that you learned in that 10 years of pain?
Well, number one, that, the first 4 weeks, while I'm impatient, patient and impatient, a great sales, if you know the activities that a great salesperson should be doing, they don't have to know anything about your business, but they can go do those activities in the first 4 weeks. And if they can't do those activities in the first 4 weeks, they're not going to do it. That's number one. And then number two, that a great sales manager was usually 99% of the time not a great salesperson. They're just different animals. Oh, and then I guess the third thing was that, somebody that's out there hunting or, knocking on doors like I was is not your account manager. And if you want them to develop business from your current accounts, again, different animals. And so those lessons served us well. I mean, in our last, it took us 30 years to get from 1 million to 6 million. It took us 3 years to go from 6 million to 11 million.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
Crazy. Yeah. I mean, to me, the multiples are driven through great systems, strong leadership, clear growth, predictable growth, that it's not all over the place, that it's not, like a jackrabbit.
Yeah.
And truly, culture. I mean, if you've got happy people that are going to stay because, generally speaking, with a higher multiple, they're not looking to get rid of the people.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what they're buying. They're buying, when Terminix bought us, they didn't buy our customer list, I can tell you. They didn't pay what they paid for our customers. They paid for our culture. They paid for our leadership. They paid for our systems. And they were deep, and they wanted to use those and leverage them within the organization.
Tell us a little bit about the process of being approached by Terminix. How do they reach out to you?
So we get a call. Well, a couple things. Number one, I'd always been told you have a number. And it's just not a number. It's what it would take to sell your business. What would it take to actually pull the trigger? And I always had this list, and I always had coached my brother that we were going to have this list. And not in our heads, on paper. And we did. And the other thing,
documented this, and
we had documented it.
And did it change every year?
Yeah, a little bit. But, like one of the things that was on the list was I wanted to be one step below the C-suite. Who's going to hire a 55-year-old white guy to be in the C-suite of a $2 billion company? Nobody's doing that. But I could get really close to that. And that was one of the things that I wanted, right? So we had our number, and I knew all the multiples that my friends were selling for, and crazy numbers at that point. And we had the list. So we had that. The other thing that I had been told and taught in Build to Sell was you also have somebody by your side that's helping you make sure that you are truly building the company in the best way possible, that it's framed the best. That person was Lance Tullius, the Tullius Partners. He was one of the best brokers, still is, in the pest control industry. He understood our industry. He understood. And we talk all the time. But he was never shopping, and I wasn't for sale. So when Terminix came knocking, I had both. And they said, can you meet us at Philadelphia International Airport? And I said, yes. And I called Lance and said, can you fly into Philadelphia? And I remember Dion Pearson, who was their chief revenue officer, comes in, and he's, telling us about this new CEO that they have. He's like there 6 months. Nick Vardy, who's changing, he's been brought on to transform Terminix, and they've been looking, and they found us, and they wanted us. And he said, what would it take for us to get you? And I said, well, we have a list, and, but you're not going to give us this. And he said, well, can you show me the list? And I said, well, yeah. I said, I'd have to go, I didn't bring it with me. But, if I get online, give me Rick and I a few minutes, and we just want to make sure the list is right. He said, if we look at the list and we say yes, will you sign an LOI today?
No pressure.
I'm like, well, yeah, but you're not going to, but that's fine. Yeah, sure, whatever. Then my brother and I go off, and we bring out the list, and we hand it to Dion, and he looks it over. He looks it down, looks up, looks down, looks up. I think by the third time he looked up, he goes, we're going to do this. And I looked at my brother and went like, WTF? Like, what now? And my brother looks square at me and goes like, you know what now? You've been telling me for all these freaking years, Phil, that we had to have a number. And then if somebody said they would give it to us and all the stuff, we're doing it. Sign the piece of paper. That's what you're going to do. I was like, crap. And it was my baby, right? And, you're given, right? Yeah, it's that moment of truth. Like, it's like, wow, like this is really going to happen. And there's still going to be due diligence. It's an LOI. We know what it is, but they know our underlying numbers. They've done research clearly. And let me tell you, I don't know about you and due diligence, but I would never wish that on anybody.
I say that all the time. I say there's no scenario where it doesn't suck. It just sucks. And I tell that to everybody. Awful. You want the check, you got to deal with the nightmare of diligence. Tell us about that relationship. When did it start? When did you start kind of thinking about that narrative with him so that you'd be at a position where you could actually, have this conversation with Terminix?
Probably, I'd have to say 7 to 8 years prior.
Oh my God. Way early.
Yeah. And he's an amazing guy. I mean, he was really looking out for us. It was never about his number. There were so many things we didn't think about. I mean, I thought of everything, and he would just ask me a question. I'd go like, shit, didn't think about that. Really made us think. And it was getting it, really it was the conversations leading up to that point. We were in a great place at that point. And if it hadn't gone well, no problem. We would have just kept building the company.
So you wouldn't do it without someone in your corner.
I just had a friend who did it without somebody. And God bless him, I wouldn't. I mean, I think it was the most, it was worth every penny. There was things I never thought of. I can promise you I would have made some really significant mistakes that would have cost me much more than what we ended up, what he ended up taking. Plus, it just made the process easier. It wasn't as stressful. And there's a price for that. It needed to work for Terminix. It needed to work, and he worked both sides too. He wanted to make sure it was a good deal for them because, look, I was coming into that organization. They didn't want to feel like they had gotten duped either. It has to win for everybody.
So you sell the business. First off, does your brother come with the business? Is he in the business post-transaction?
Yeah. So the cool thing was we had very, very, very small earnout. It was really short, and it was a small earnout too. It was mostly cash up front. Because we had built the system in the company that this company could run without Rick and I. Rick was there to go build and transform their bedbug markets. And he did. Change the way they did bedbugs. And my job was to take the companies that we had acquired that were $20 million or less in revenue, they had kept the brands, and grow them and systemize them and get them deeper and stronger and better. And that was my business unit. And it was just way cool. What an on-the-job MBA, Corey. It was the hardest job I've ever done in my entire life. And I've learned more in the 20 months that I did that than I've done it was the fastest 20 months of learning that I've ever done because there was things that I had never touched.
So what are 2 or 3 things you learned? What was in this, this graduate degree you got post-close?
One, data, one of my favorite, I would go in once a month to do the monthly operating report to the C-suite. And I'd go in with my deck of what my business unit was doing. And Dion would have me come into his office a couple of days before and he'd say, show me the deck. And we'd be like at 5:30 at night. And I'd pull out my deck and I was so proud of it. And, I'd worked my rear end off to get it right. And he'd look at me and he'd go, Phil, do you believe this or do you know it? I go, oh, Dion, I know it. And he'd go, really? Well, where's the data? And I'd show him my data points. And he'd go, you believe it. And he would go, Phil, you go into that room and you tell them you know it, you're going to be just chewed alive. I mean, you have nothing. That's your belief. Now, if you want to say you believe it, that's fine. You go do that. You do whatever you want. And, the first few times I would go in there and said, I knew it. And Corey, what happened, right? It's data rules. I mean, when you're a fan of EOS and traction, you get data. And data isn't just the outcomes, it's the activities. Data is critical. Data takes the subjectivity out of the business and brings you objectivity. Now, I'm not saying data is everything, and it isn't. And I still believe in gut. But gosh, did I work more from a data set. I learned the importance of data, where to get the data, how to gather the data, and critically, understanding the activities. We talked about, when you were asking about me knocking on doors. Back then, I was running by data even though I didn't realize I was running by data.
One thing that's come up on almost every episode of The Turn is EOS. What the heck is EOS? It's a system of managing your business. And one of the things I will say is that as businesses get more sophisticated and as they get harder and harder to run, because there's just so many people to manage, tools like EOS can be an amazing thing to scale. So if you haven't, it might be something to look into, because as you'll see, almost everyone we interview, they've sold for huge sums, and they were using EOS to do it. So when he's pushing you like this, did it piss you off?
Oh, yeah. Look, I also understood that, they sometimes too much data slows you down too. And I think there's a balance there. I don't think in my, formative, in the first 30 years, we didn't have enough systems. We didn't have enough data. And then again, the last 3 years, we were, EOS pushed us to have data. EOS pushed us to have systems. And then how were we developing our frontline managers? We didn't have a system to develop our frontline managers. Well, we created a system to develop our frontline managers. And we started having data on that.
So Phil, you saw all these businesses Terminix acquired. I'm curious, what are some lessons learned for our listeners on what you guys did to those businesses after you bought them?
Let's start with they didn't have a lot of systems. They didn't have clear target markets. They had probably effective to somewhat effective leadership. They were usually pretty good at doing pest control. But all the other stuff, they're flying by the seat of their pants. And if you ask them questions, they couldn't give you a concise answer. And that was consistent across all of them. And tons of inefficiency, a lot of inefficiency.
It's amazing how many businesses run on gut instinct. But let me tell you, as you grow and get more sophisticated, that just doesn't work. You have to be able to manage your business in real time with real information. Phil talks about this. And in fact, after he sold, the CEO pushed him hard. And it didn't feel that good, but the reality is he learned a ton. And he went from running his business on gut to conviction because he had good data to back it up. I'm kind of curious, what led you to the point, I know you left at a certain point, what led you to leave the company?
Simple. Nick Vardy, the guy that brought me in, the CEO, had run out of runway with the board. Some things happened. And Nick called me up in, I think it was January 19th and said, Phil, I have a short list of people that I'm letting know that I'm going to be resigning tomorrow and you're on the list. And because Nick cared about me. Nick brought me on for a reason. I was there to help him achieve his vision. But, what the board had, the deal that he had cut with the board didn't, it didn't pan out, didn't work out. And so Nick resigned, and I then went to HR and said, I'm sure you don't probably want me around. And they said, no, not really. You're with the
You're one of his guys.
Group. And I said, okay, so then, if you want to buy me out, you can buy me out. And they did. They bought me out. They did. It was a good deal. And so we cut the deal the first week of February. My last day was April 1. It was over.
So you sold in 2018. What year was this?
2020. April of 2020,
so you stayed
I
on
left.
for 2 years?
Yeah, just short of 2 years.
Okay. What's life look like for you since that time?
So I tried retiring for 3 months because I always thought I was going to be retired at age 55. Yeah, that lasted for a whole 3 months. I learned real quickly that retirement will never happen in Phil Cooper's lifetime. It doesn't mean that I don't have passions. I have a lot of passions, Corey. I also like making an impact. And I like changing things and touching things and growing things. That matters. So we had done EOS self-implemented at Cooper Pest for, 3 years. And I knew what it was like to, I saw these implementer guys and I said, that would be kind of cool to be one of them. And I called one of the best implementers in the country, Hank O'Donnell, who's local to us. And I said, do you think that maybe could you see me doing this? And he went like, yeah, Phil, you were born to do that. And so I took that journey and I took that leap. And that happened in August of 2020 when I went and became an EOS implementer. Gosh, I love it. It's building systems and helping people, build that operating system for a company and their leadership team. And the joy it brings is fantastic.
So how do people find out about your program? Where can they find you?
For accelerated gross profit, it's very simple. Look up acceleratedgrossprofit.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. For EOS, it's phil.cooper@eosworldwide.com. Look, I'll talk shop with anybody. I love helping people and talking, and I'll talk EOS any day of the week, and I'll talk frontline manager and development any day of the week.
So on that note, Phil Cooper, thanks for joining us and talking about your business. What a great story.
Thanks, Corey. You're awesome.
Yeah, my pleasure. Let's win. If you could do me a favor, like and subscribe. I've heard from so many people that they've listened to the show, but we're new and we need subscribers. And it really helps with the algorithm if you click the like button. So thank you for watching, but also send it to a friend who might enjoy it. For more information, visit us at iconicfounders.com or send us an email at theturn@iconicfounders.com, because I love it when the good guys win. If you've made it to this point in the episode and you haven't watched my interview with Seth Zeller yet, please do. You can click the link right here.